Hello. In this session, we're going to look at the validation rules in automation objects. We will first explain why do we need validation rules. Then we will see how to define a validation rule in automation object. And then finally, we will show a shortcut version of creating validation rules from the test execution. So let's get to our API tester. And let's just run a single example from one of those that we were using before to explain what is the purpose of having the validation rules in the first place. So I have here my test case. It's again a similar one based on the ones that you can see in the other movies. And when we execute this test case, as you know, we will send a message to the integration platform, in this case to SAP PO. We will wait for the results to arrive, and then INT4Suite compares the result against the stored reference from the original run. Okay, so let's see what happens here. We see that in the reference message, in the current execution, there are differences. The one that we know already about the order number, because we've chosen to generate a new one. We see that there's a different date, and we see that there's a different time. And obviously, we are okay with those differences. I mean, we expect the date might be different, we expect the time might be different, but it always depends on what is the actual content of your integration mapping, of your ICOs and iFlows. So you need to be very careful when choosing to add validation rules, because the errors that you are seeing here, the differences that are highlighted by the comparison engine, might be actually signaling that there is a problem with your interface. And apparently, this might be also the case when you're taking the messages for production and running them on QA. If you see such a differences, it takes a moment always to think and understand where is the difference coming from. For me, with the date, time, and the order number, I know that this is expected, so that type of difference should not fail the testing. Okay, so how do we fix that? One thing that I see repeated here is that the order number is always in the segment bell and error, and so here bell and error. So I could assume, as a validation rule, that each time the data in this segment is different, then I should be having a just maybe an information, but not necessarily fail the test case. So, what could I do with this? Let me get back to the test case. And let me look at the output message. I will copy the whole text of the order, and I will go to my XPath tool, okay? Let me paste the data here. I will click the format button so I can see very nicely the data formatted. And okay, let me find the order number, which was a problem. So it was bell and error. So let me try just clicking on it and see it's in the segment, but it's also repeated then in another segment as we've seen. So I can just try with a very simple rule. 2 slashes, so I find it around any place in the document, and let me put bell and error. Okay. I see the number was found here. I see it also was found again in a different segment. So I could say, okay, that might be a valid rule. If bell and error is different, the segment is different, then that should not be rendering any problems. Okay, so let me copy that and get back to the cockpit and look into the automation object. In the automation object, I go to the edit mode and to the payload validation sections. And here I can see I can create a new rule. Okay, so that will be ignore different order number. So that would be an XPath. The expression is quite simple with bell and error. And then I can choose what to do with that. And then here I have some options. First and simple one is the warning. Warning is that it will still be highlighted as a difference, but it will not render any error. So I might just choose ignore, which will not even highlight the difference at all. I could also use different sections, which is based on mapping, on value mapping. but that is further described in our manual. For now, we will choose to ignore this difference. So let me save that. Okay, it's saved. And let's get back to the cockpit and run the test case again. Okay, again, we see a failure, and let's see what happens exactly in the execution. Now we do see here that the difference for the order number is no longer highlighted. So INT4 suite will consider it okay. But here we again we see the date is different and the time is different. So how do I fix it again? Now we can be quite smart and see, okay, the date and time is always in the E1 EDK03 segment. And I know, because I know a little bit about order IDOCs, that this segment actually can contain different dates. I'm not sure if I want all of them to be ignored, but on the other hand, that could be convenient enough. Now, having this knowledge, I don't need to go again to my XPath editor. I can use another feature of INT4 Suite, which is to execute this test case with parameters and run it in a debug mode. Okay, so debug mode will give me two things. First is a detailed log of execution, and the second one is the ability to automatically create validation rules from the actual test run. So now I jump here. Okay, I see a lot of debug information. I could even load more of that. But what is happening here, I do have also here a line that allows me to create an exception for this specific data set. Okay, for each of the difference, I have this link to create an exception. So let me click the first one. And here I see a window pop up to create the ignore rule. Okay, so ignore date difference as a description, so that everybody knows why it's here. And then, as I noted, the dates are always in the E1 EDK03 segment. So I can just choose here to either use the datum segment or remove that and always allow differences for the E1 EDK03 segment, which is what I will do. I will also make this rule type as a warning because, okay, I might want to accept that differences, but on the other hand, it's a date and it's a data. So I might not want to always, bluntly ignore that, which is not as obvious as a different order number. Now when I click create, the automation object is updated. You can see here it says data was saved. So let me close this. And let me run again the same test case with a modified automation object. We can also click on the automation object, go to the payload validations, and we see that the other payload validation rule was also added as we wanted. Okay, so now when I run this test case, okay, I go into the test case, and I can see the payload testing is actually passed. And here we will see one thing. For the order number, as we chosen to ignore it, it's not even highlighted. For the date, where we decided that we want a different dates to be a warning, we see this highlighted in yellow. But the overall result for the message comparison is passed, which means we're successful with the validation rules definition. Thank you.